you were lied to, not once, not twice, but every single day, by your school, by your parents, by the system that built itself on your confusion. They told you getting rich was hard, that it required luck, that it was reserved for the special few, the connected, the privileged, the ones born into the right zip code with the right last name and the right handshakes. They made wealth feel like a mountain so tall that most people never even attempt the climb. And that was exactly the point. But here's what they never told you. Getting rich is easy. Not effortless, not overnight, but easy once you understand the rules. Once you see what's actually happening beneath the surface of money, wealth, and power. Once you realize that the game isn't rigged against you nearly as much as it is designed to confuse you. And confusion keeps you broke. Confusion keeps you working 40 hours a week for someone else's dream. Confusion keeps you buying liabilities and calling them investments. Confusion keeps you one paycheck away from disaster while telling yourself you're doing fine. Right now in 2026, there are 23-year-olds building seven-figure portfolios from their laptops. There are people with 0 college degrees, 0 family money, 0 connections, stacking assets while their former classmates debate which streaming subscription to cancel to save $12 a month. The difference between those two groups is not talent. It is not timing. It is not luck. It is knowledge. It is perspective. It is the willingness to see money for what it truly is, a tool, a language, a system, and then learn how to use it instead of being used by it. This audiobook is that knowledge. Every chapter you are about to hear was built to dismantle the lies you were handed and replace them with the brutal, unfiltered truth about how wealth is actually created in the modern world. We are not talking about get-rich-quick schemes. We are not talking about crypto hype or lottery tickets or viral side hustles that disappear in 6 months. We are talking about the deep, foundational principles that the wealthy have always known and the poor have always been kept from, principles that work in any economy, in any year, under any circumstances, including right now in a world being reshaped by artificial intelligence, inflation, and the collapse of the traditional career path. Think about where you are right now. Maybe you are working a job that pays you just enough to keep you coming back, but never enough to set you free. Maybe you have debt that feels like a chain around your ankle, growing heavier every month, no matter how hard you pull. Maybe you watch other people win, buying houses, traveling freely, building businesses, and you tell yourself they got lucky, they had help, they had something you do not have. But what if that story is wrong? What if the only thing separating you from the life you want is a set of ideas you have never been given? That is exactly what this audiobook is going to prove to you. We are going to start by exposing the traps, the invisible systems designed to keep average people average. We are going to tear apart the lies about education, employment, and the so-called safe path that generations were sold like gospel. Then we are going to rebuild your thinking from the ground up. We will talk about how money actually works, how the wealthy think differently at a neurological level, how debt can be a weapon instead of a wound, how assets compound silently while you sleep, and how ordinary people in 2026 are using digital leverage, AI tools, and unconventional strategies to build wealth faster than any previous generation in history. We will go deep into the psychology of staying broke, because make no mistake, poverty is often a mindset before it becomes a bank balance. We will talk about the environments you surround yourself with, the people who drain your ambition without you even realizing it, and the daily habits that are either building your future or quietly destroying it. And then we will talk about legacy, what it means to build something that outlasts you, that serves your children and their children, that transforms your family's entire financial trajectory forever. 15 chapters, each one sharper than the last, each one designed to hit you where it matters. Not just in your mind, but in your decisions, your actions, your daily life, starting from the moment this audiobook ends. You are not here by accident. Something in you is ready. Something in you is tired of waiting, tired of struggling, tired of watching the gap between where you are and where you want to be grow wider every year. That voice inside you is right, and today we answer it. Stick with me till the end. The final shift alone could change how you see money forever. Do not skip. Do not leave. Your future self is watching. Chapter 1. The Comfortable Trap. Why your safe life is the riskiest thing you own. There is a version of your life that looks completely fine from the outside. You wake up at the same time every morning, drive the same route, sit in the same chair, collect the same paycheck, come home, watch something on a screen, go to sleep, and do it all again. Nothing is wrong exactly, but nothing is growing either. And that feeling, that low hum of stagnation that you have learned to ignore, is not just discomfort. It is a warning signal that most people silence with routine until it is too late to act on it. The comfortable trap is not about poverty. It is not about people who are visibly struggling. It is about people who are surviving well enough that they never feel the urgency to change. It is about the man autumn self he will start investing when he earns 80. It is about the woman who stays in a job she has outgrown because the benefits are good and the commute is manageable. It is about the couple who keeps meaning to build a second income stream but never quite finds the weekend to start. Comfort is the enemy that arrives wearing the face of stability, and it is far more dangerous than hardship, because hardship forces action while comfort whispers that waiting is wise. Here is the financial reality that nobody frames this way. Risk is not something you take when you make a bold move. Risk is something you carry every single day. You do nothing. Every year you spend your prime earning years inside a single income source. You are betting your entire financial future on one employer, one economy, one set of circumstances staying exactly as they are. That is not safety. That is concentration risk so extreme that any professional investor would call it reckless. The person who puts all their savings into one stock is called foolish. The person who puts all their income-generating capacity into one job is called responsible. The difference between those two things is nothing but social conditioning. In 2026, the comfortable trap has become more dangerous than ever before. Artificial intelligence is restructuring entire industries at a pace that makes 5-year career plans feel like science fiction. Companies that employed thousands are automating those roles, not over decades but over quarters. The job that felt secure in 2022 has a software equivalent being tested right now. The salary that felt like enough in 2020 buys meaningfully less today because inflation did not wait for your raise. And yet millions of people are still operating on the assumption that if they just keep doing what they are doing, things will eventually improve on their own. That assumption is costing them years they will never get back. The psychological reason people stay in the comfortable trap is not laziness. That is the easy and wrong explanation. People stay because the brain is wired to weight certain immediate comfort far more heavily than uncertain future reward. Every time you think about making a change, starting a business, learning a new skill, relocating your spending, your brain runs a threat assessment, and the discomfort of potential failure registers louder than the quiet devastation of guaranteed stagnation. This is why the trap is so effective. It does not feel like a trap. It feels like peace. Breaking out does not require a dramatic life overhaul. It requires an honest audit. Look at your financial life right now and ask one question. If nothing changes, where does this path actually lead in 10 years? Not where you hope it leads. Not where it could lead if everything goes right. Where does it mathematically, realistically lead if you keep doing exactly what you are doing? If the answer to that question does not match the life you want, then the comfortable trap has already claimed you. And the only exit is the decision, made today, not someday, that the risk of staying still is far greater than the risk of moving forward. Chapter 2. The lie they sold you in a classroom. How education trained you to be an employee. Sit down. Be quiet. Raise your hand if you want to speak. Follow the syllabus. Study what you were told. Pass the test. Get the grade. Repeat for 12 to 16 years and emerge ready for the workforce. That is not an education system. That is an assembly line with homework. And if you want to understand why so many intelligent, hardworking people spend their lives financially struggling despite doing everything they were told to do right, you have to start here, in the classroom where wealth was never once mentioned as a subject worth studying. The modern education system was not designed to produce wealthy, independent thinkers. It was designed in an industrial era to produce reliable, obedient workers, not because of some shadowy conspiracy, but because that was the economic need of the time. Factories needed people who could follow instructions precisely, show up consistently, and subordinate their individual judgment to the process. Schools delivered exactly that, and while the economy has evolved beyond recognition, the educational model has remained almost entirely intact. You are being prepared for a world that no longer exists by an institution that has not updated its core mission in over a century. Think about what 12 or more years of formal education taught you about money. You learn nothing about how interest compounds against you on a credit card. You learn nothing about the difference between an asset and a liability. You learn nothing about tax strategy, investment vehicles, business structures, negotiation, or the psychology of pricing. You were not taught how to read a balance sheet, how inflation erodes purchasing power, how to evaluate a business opportunity, or how wealthy people actually build and protect their net worth. You were taught to solve for X, memorize historical dates, and write essays analyzing novels. All valuable in their own right, but collectively useless when you are sitting across from a loan officer at 22 years old trying to understand what you are actually signing. What you were taught, however, and this is the part that matters, is that your value is determined by your credentials. That a degree is the entry point to a good life. That the path is linear, study hard, get qualified, get hired, work your way up, retire comfortably. That model worked for one specific generation under one specific set of economic conditions. It does not work now. The credential is not worthless, but it is no longer the asset it was sold to you as. Student loan debt in 2026 sits at historic highs. Graduate unemployment and underemployment rates have been climbing for years. People with advanced degrees are driving for rideshare platforms not because they failed, but because the promise attached to their education did not materialize the way they were guaranteed it would. The deepest damage the classroom does is not what it fails to teach. It is what it successfully instills. It teaches you that there is always a correct answer and someone above you who knows it. It teaches you that failure is shameful and should be avoided rather than learned from. It teaches you to seek approval from teachers, from employers, from systems, rather than to build internal standards of success. These are the exact opposite of the traits that builds financial independence. Wealthy people are comfortable with ambiguity, embrace calculated failure as data, and build their own definitions of success rather than chasing someone else's rubric. Reclaiming your financial education means accepting that it was never given to you and deciding to give it to yourself. It means reading the books that were not assigned, learning the vocabulary of money, assets, cash flow, leverage, equity, compounding, arbitrage, until it is as natural as the vocabulary of your native language. It means finding mentors, communities, and information sources that are oriented toward building rather than toward compliance. The classroom gave you a starting point. What you build from here is entirely your own responsibility, and that is not a burden. Once you truly accept it, it is the most liberating thing you will ever realize. Chapter 3: The Paycheck Prison. Understanding why a salary will never make you rich. There is nothing wrong with earning a salary. Millions of people do it, and millions of people need it. And for most of human history, it was the primary economic relationship available to working people. But there is something deeply, mathematically wrong with believing that a salary alone can make you wealthy. Not just unlikely, wrong. The structure of employment income contains built-in limitations so fundamental that no amount of promotion, no raise, no bonus can override them. And until you understand those limitations clearly, you will keep optimizing within a system that is incapable of delivering what you are actually after. The first limitation is the time ceiling. A salary is payment for time. You have 24 hours in a day. You can work 8 of them, 12 of them, even 16 of them. But you cannot work more hours than exist. This means your income has a hard ceiling determined entirely by the number of hours you can physically sustain multiplied by your hourly rate. No matter how talented you are, no matter how valuable your skills, the moment you stop working, the income stops. There is no mechanism inside employment income for your money to work when you are not. It is a one-to-one exchange, your time for their money, and that ratio never improves no matter how senior you become. The second limitation is taxation. Salaried income is the most heavily taxed form of income available. Before you see a single dollar of your paycheck, the government has taken its share. And because employment income is easy to track, easy to verify, and politically simple to tax, it is taxed at the highest marginal rates with the fewest deductions available. Wealthy people do not earn most of their income through salaries. They earn it through capital gains, business distributions, real estate cash flows, and other income structures that are taxed at dramatically lower rates and come with legal reduction strategies that salaried employees simply do not have access to. You are not just earning less than the wealthy. You are keeping a smaller percentage of what you earn. The third limitation is leverage. When you work for a salary, you are the asset. Your employer takes your time, your skills, your energy, and your productivity, and they sell the output of that for more than they pay you. That difference is profit, and it belongs to them. You receive a fixed payment regardless of how much value you create beyond that fixed rate. This is not exploitation in a moral sense. It is simply the deal. But it means that no matter how exceptional your performance, your upside is capped, while your employer's upside is theoretically unlimited. The person who owns the business where you work will always have a higher wealth ceiling than you, not because they are smarter or work harder, but because the structure of ownership is fundamentally different from the structure of employment. None of this means you should quit your job tomorrow. Your salary is your foundation, your seed capital, your stability while you build. The mistake is not having a salary. The mistake is treating your salary as your financial strategy rather than your financial starting point. Every wealthy person who did not inherit their wealth used income from somewhere to fund the investments, businesses, and assets that eventually replaced that income. The salary is the bridge. The goal is to build the other side of that bridge as quickly and as strategically as possible, so that one day you can stop being entirely dependent on crossing it every morning. The paycheck prison is not locked from the outside. That is the hardest truth of this chapter. The door is open. It has always been open. But most people look at the open door and see risk rather than freedom, and so they stay. They negotiate for better conditions inside the prison, a nicer office, a slightly higher rate, an extra week of vacation, instead of walking through the door and building something on the other side. Your salary is not your enemy. Your belief that it is enough is. Chapter 4. Rich brain versus broke brain. The psychological differences that actually determine your net worth before a single dollar is earned, spent, saved, or invested. Wealth is a psychology. It is a set of beliefs, habits, and mental frameworks that either draw money toward you or consistently push it away. This is not mysticism. This is not positive thinking, self-help fluff. This is neuroscience and behavioral economics dressed in plain language. The way you think about money determines every financial decision you make. And those decisions, compounded over years, produce your net worth. Change the thinking and the outcomes change. Keep the thinking the same and no strategy, no raise, no windfall will save you. The broke brain operates from scarcity. It sees money as a finite resource that must be protected, hoarded, or spent quickly before something takes it away. It makes financial decisions from fear. Fear of missing out, fear of losing what little it has, fear of being judged for wanting more. The scarcity mindset is not a character flaw. It is often the direct product of a childhood, where money was tight, where financial stress was visible in the household, where adults talked about money in terms of what they could not afford, rather than what they were building toward. These early imprints run deep, and they do not dissolve simply because your income increases. Plenty of people earn 6 figures and still think like someone who grew up with nothing, spending impulsively to soothe anxiety, avoiding investment because loss feels unbearable, making financial choices based on emotion rather than strategy. The rich brain operates from abundance, not in a naive, reality-denying way. The wealthy have stress and uncertainty like everyone else, but in the fundamental belief that wealth is generative, that opportunities are abundant, that money invested wisely grows rather than disappears, and that financial setbacks are temporary and informative rather than permanent and catastrophic. This belief allows wealthy thinkers to take calculated risks without paralysis, to lose money on a bad investment without it destroying their confidence, and to see a financial problem as an engineering challenge rather than a personal verdict on their worth as a human being. One of the most significant psychological differences is the relationship with time. The broke brain optimizes for now. It buys the thing that feels good today. It avoids the discomfort of discipline because the reward for discipline is abstract and distant. The rich brain is fluent in delayed gratification, not as a form of self-punishment, but as a genuine understanding that the sacrifice of small pleasures today creates massive freedom tomorrow. This is not willpower in the traditional sense. It is vision. When you can see clearly what the future version of your financial life looks like, and you want that version badly enough, the short-term sacrifices stop feeling like deprivation and start feeling like investment. Another critical difference is the response to failure. The broke brain treats financial failure as confirmation of its worst fears, that it is not smart enough, not lucky enough, not the kind of person who gets to win. Each setback reinforces the story that wealth is for other people. The rich brain treats failure as feedback. Every bad investment, every failed business, every financial mistake carries information about what to do differently next time. Wealthy people fail constantly. They fail faster and more expensively than most people ever will. But they process those failures as curriculum rather than condemnation. You cannot think your way to wealth without action. But you also cannot act your way to wealth without the right thinking underneath those actions. The first and most important financial upgrade you will ever make is not an investment account or a business idea. It is the decision to audit the beliefs you carry about money, where they came from, whether they are serving you, and what you would need to believe instead to make the decisions your future self requires of you. The brain is not fixed. It rewires through exposure, through repetition, through surrounding yourself with people and information that normalize a different way of seeing. Start there. Everything else follows. Chapter 5. Money is not what you think it is. The truth about currency, value, and the game behind the game. Most people interact with money every single day of their adult lives without ever understanding what it actually is. They earn it, spend it, stress about it, and occasionally save it. But the deeper mechanics of how money works, where it comes from, why it gains and loses value, and how the people who understand those mechanics use that knowledge to compound their wealth while everyone else treads water. That understanding is almost never taught, almost never discussed in mainstream conversation, and almost never part of the financial vocabulary of ordinary people. That gap in understanding is not accidental, and it is expensive. Money is not wealth. This is the first and most important distinction. Money is a medium of exchange, a collectively agreed-upon tool that allows you to trade your output for someone else's output without having to directly barter. It has no intrinsic value. A $100 bill cannot feed you, shelter you, or warm you. Its value exists entirely in the shared belief that it can be exchanged for things that can. This means the value of money is not fixed. It is constantly shifting relative to the supply of goods and services, the confidence people have in the issuing government, global economic conditions, and 100 other variables that most people never think about when they look at their bank balance. What this means practically is that saving money in a bank account at interest rates below inflation is not saving at all. It is slow-motion loss. If inflation is running at 4 or 5% annually, as it has in many economies, including the United States, for extended periods in the early and mid-2020s, and your savings account is paying 1%, you are losing purchasing power every single year while feeling like you are being responsible. The number in your account may be growing incrementally. The real value of that number is shrinking. This is one of the quietest and most devastating wealth traps available, and it catches the people who are trying hardest to be financially responsible. Understanding money also means understanding how it is created. Governments and central banks do not simply find money. They create it, primarily through the issuing of debt and the expansion of credit. When more money is created without a corresponding increase in goods and services, the existing money becomes worth less. This is inflation in its most direct form, and it functions as a hidden tax on everyone who holds cash. The wealthy protect themselves from this through assets, real estate, equities, businesses, commodities, whose values tend to rise with or ahead of inflation because they represent real productive capacity rather than paper promises. This is why wealthy people are always invested in something. Holding cash is a choice they make tactically and temporarily. It is never their long-term strategy. The game behind the game is understanding that the financial system is designed by people who understand these mechanics for people who do not. Credit card companies charge 20 to 30% interest because they know most customers do not truly understand the compounding effect of that rate on a revolving balance. Mortgage products are structured to front-load interest payments because most homeowners do not realize they will pay nearly as much in interest as in principal over a 30-year term. Retail investment products carry fees that seem small in percentage terms but consume enormous portions of long-term returns when compounded over decades. None of this is illegal. All of it is predicated on the financial illiteracy of the customer. The answer is not cynicism, and it is not paralysis. The answer is literacy. Once you understand that money is a tool whose value fluctuates, that saving without investing is losing, that inflation is a constant force working against your stored wealth, and that the financial products marketed most aggressively to ordinary people are almost always more profitable for the seller than the buyer. Once you understand all of that, you stop playing the game by the rules written for the uninformed. You start making decisions from the position of someone who sees the board clearly. And that clarity is worth more than any single financial strategy you will ever learn. Chapter 6. The Debt Weapon: How the Rich Borrow Their Way to Billions While You Pay Interest into Poverty. The word debt lands differently depending on your upbringing. For most people, especially those who grew up in households where money was tight, debt is a source of shame, a mark of failure, a hole you fall into and spend years climbing out of. For wealthy individuals, institutions, and anyone who has studied how capital actually moves through the economy, debt is something else entirely. It is a tool. It is leverage. It is one of the most powerful mechanisms for accelerating wealth creation ever devised, and the fact that you were never taught how to use it is one of the most consequential gaps in your financial education. To understand debt as a wealth weapon, you have to understand the concept of return on investment. If you borrow money at 5% and deploy that money into an asset generating 12% returns, the difference, 7%, is profit generated from capital you did not own. You used someone else's money to create returns that belong entirely to you after servicing the cost of borrowing. This is the foundational mechanic behind virtually every major real estate empire, every leveraged buyout, every business acquisition in history. The wealthy did not necessarily have more money than you to start. In many cases, they had more debt, smarter, more strategically deployed debt, and they used that debt to own assets that generated returns far exceeding its cost. Real estate is the most accessible version of this principle for ordinary people. When you take a mortgage to purchase a rental property, you're using borrowed capital to acquire an asset that produces income and appreciates over time. If you put 20% down on a property and the property appreciates 10% in a year, you have not made a 10% return on your investment. You have made a 50% return on your actual cash invested, because the appreciation applies to the full value of the asset, not just the portion you funded yourself. This is leverage in its most tangible form, and it is why real estate has created more millionaires than almost any other asset class. Not because the properties themselves are magical, but because the financing structures around them allow ordinary people to control significant assets with relatively small amounts of their own capital. Business works the same way. Companies routinely borrow to expand operations, acquire competitors, develop new products, and enter new markets. The calculation is straightforward. If borrowed capital can be deployed into activities that generate returns exceeding the cost of that capital, the borrowing creates value. Private equity firms have built trillion-dollar industries on exactly this principle, buying businesses with borrowed money, improving their operations, and selling them at multiples that generate enormous returns on the actual equity invested. The debt is the engine. The strategy is the driver. The reason most people cannot access this kind of debt is not because it is unavailable. It is because they have used debt differently their entire lives. Consumer debt, credit cards, car loans, personal loans for things that lose value, does not generate returns. It destroys them. Borrowing to buy a depreciating asset or to fund consumption is the opposite of leverage. It is a drain, and a compounding one, because the interest accrues on the full balance regardless of whether the underlying purchase is still generating any value. This is the debt most people know. This is a debt that earned debt its terrible reputation among people who could never afford its consequences. The shift from consumer debt to investment debt is one of the most powerful financial pivots available to you. It starts with the discipline to stop using debt as a substitute for income, to stop borrowing to maintain a lifestyle you have not yet earned, and to begin using credit strategically, building the credit score and borrowing history that eventually gives you access to lower rates and larger lines of capital. It means studying the assets available in your market, understanding their income potential and appreciation history, and identifying opportunities where borrowed capital deployed intelligently could generate returns that exceed its cost by a meaningful margin. Debt used this way is not a burden. It is a multiplier. And the difference between the person who understands that and the person who does not is often the difference between building wealth and simply surviving. Chapter 7. Assets versus BUS. Liabilities. The one distinction that divides the rich from everyone else. If there is one concept in all of personal finance that, once truly understood, changes how you see every financial decision you will ever make, it is the distinction between an asset and a liability. Not the textbook accounting definition. The real, functional, cash flow definition that wealthy people use to evaluate everything they own and everything they are considering buying. This distinction is so simple that it can be stated in one sentence, and yet its implications are so profound that the people who internalize it build wealth almost automatically, while the people who never learn it spend their lives wondering where the money went. An asset puts money into your pocket. A liability takes money out of your pocket. That is the complete framework. Not what something is worth on paper. Not what your accountant calls it. Not what the bank will lend against it. Whether it generates cash flow that comes to you or whether it requires ongoing cash outflow from you. By this definition, the vast majority of what the average person considers their wealth, their home, their car, their possessions, is actually a liability, and the vast majority of what wealthy people accumulate, income-producing real estate, dividend-paying stocks, businesses, intellectual property, royalties, are assets. The contrast is not subtle. It is the entire game. The family home is the most emotionally charged example, because home ownership has been marketed for generations as the cornerstone of financial stability and the primary vehicle for wealth building. And for some people, in some markets it has been. But a home you live in does not generate income. It requires mortgage payments, property taxes, insurance, maintenance, and repairs. It takes money from you every single month without exception. Its value may appreciate over time, and that appreciation can be meaningful. But until you sell it or extract equity, it produces no cash flow. It is a use asset, valuable and worth owning, but not a wealth-building machine in the way it has been sold to you. The person who buys a home to live in is not automatically building wealth. The person who buys a property to rent out is because that property generates income regardless of whether they ever sell it. Cars are the cleaner example, because at least with a home, you can hold on to the appreciation story. A car loses value from the moment you drive it off the lot. Every month you make a payment on its appreciating asset. Insurance, fuel, maintenance, parking. The total cost of vehicle ownership for the average American family exceeds $10,000 per year. That is $10,000 per year flowing out of your household into a depreciating object. Wealthy people understand this, which is why so many of them drive modest cars and lease rather than purchase, or structure vehicle costs through businesses where the expense is at minimum tax deductible. The car is not the problem. The belief that an expensive car is a symbol of financial success rather than financial drain is. Building an asset base requires a fundamental reorientation of your spending decisions. Before every significant financial outlay, the question becomes not, can I afford this? But does this generate a return, or does it consume resources? That does not mean never spending on things that bring joy or comfort. It means being deliberate about the ratio between what you own that works for you and what you own that costs you. Wealthy people structure their lives so that their assets generate enough income to cover their liabilities and their lifestyle, and then reinvest the surplus into more assets. This is the loop. This is the compounding cycle, and it is completely available to you regardless of your starting point, as long as you begin orienting your decisions around this one foundational distinction. Chapter 8. The Compounding Secret. Why starting late is not an excuse, and starting now is everything. There is a mathematical phenomenon so powerful that Albert Einstein allegedly called it the eighth wonder of the world. Whether he actually said it is debatable. That it deserves the description is not. Compounding, the process by which returns generate their own returns over time, is the closest thing to a guaranteed path to wealth that exists in the financial world. It is not fast in the early years. It is not dramatic. It does not make for exciting social media content, but given enough time and enough consistency, it produces results so outsized relative to the initial input that they are genuinely difficult for the human brain to process intuitively. Here is the number that changes how you see this. If you invest $1,000 at 8% annual returns and never add another cent, after 10 years you have approximately $2,150. After 20 years, $4,600. After 30 years, $10,000. After 40 years, $21,000. That is a 21-to-1 return on a single $1,000 investment, achieved through no effort whatsoever beyond the initial decision to invest and the discipline not to withdraw. Now apply that principle to consistent monthly contributions and the numbers become extraordinary. The person who invests $500 a month from age 25 to 65 at 8% average returns accumulates approximately $1.7 million. The person who starts at 35 with the same contributions and the same returns accumulates approximately $700,000. Same discipline, same amount invested per month. 10 years earlier, start date, more than double the outcome. That is not strategy. That is math. The reason most people never experience the full power of compounding is that they encounter it too late, after years of consumer debt and lifestyle inflation have prevented meaningful investment, and when they finally start, the time horizon feels so short that the numbers seem unimpressive. A 50-year-old who starts investing looks at a 20-year compounding window and compares it to the 40-year window they missed and feels discouraged. But the correct comparison is not between the window they have and the window they missed. It is between starting now and not starting at all, because the person who starts at 50 and invests consistently for 20 years still accumulates far more than the person who waits until 60, and infinitely more than the person who never starts. The best time to plant a tree was 20 years ago. The second best time is right now. This is not a motivational cliché. In the context of compounding, it is a precise financial statement. Compounding also applies beyond investment accounts. It applies to skills, to knowledge, to relationships, to reputation, to business revenue, and to any system where growth in one period creates a slightly larger base for growth in the next period. The person who gets 1% better at a valuable skill every day is not 1% better after a year. They are 37 times better because each day's improvement builds on the accumulated improvement of all the days before. This is why consistent small actions in the right direction compound into extraordinary outcomes, while the person waiting for the perfect moment to make a dramatic change remains exactly where they were. The compounding secret is not a secret because it is hidden. It is a secret because it requires patience in a world engineered for immediate gratification. Every financial product marketed aggressively to ordinary people promises fast results because slow results do not sell. But the actual architecture of wealth is slow, steady, consistent, and relentlessly mathematical. The person who internalizes this, who genuinely believes that their boring, consistent investment habit today is building something extraordinary, that their future self will barely be able to believe, is the person who eventually gets to watch compounding do what it always does: deliver. Chapter 9. The Environment Tax. How your circle, your city, and your daily inputs are costing you a fortune. You are not building your financial future in a vacuum. You are building it inside an environment. A set of relationships, social norms, information inputs, and daily contexts that are constantly influencing your beliefs about money, your standards for success, and the decisions that flow from both. And that environment, if you have never intentionally chosen it, is almost certainly taxing your wealth-building capacity in ways you cannot see on any spreadsheet but that show up unmistakably in your outcomes over time. The people closest to you set your financial normal. If your 5 closest friends are all living paycheck to paycheck, treating debt as inevitable, and discussing money primarily in terms of what they cannot afford, that is your normal. You will unconsciously calibrate your spending, your ambition, and your risk tolerance to match the group. You will feel subtle social pressure to buy what they buy, spend where they spend, and validate the financial choices you all share, because validation within the group is more immediately rewarding than the distant promise of a different outcome. This is not weakness. It is human psychology functioning exactly as designed. We are social creatures, and our sense of what is normal and acceptable is calibrated primarily by the people around us. The wealthy are not immune to this dynamic. They simply benefit from it rather than suffer from it. When everyone in your environment is investing, building businesses, discussing asset allocation and tax strategy and long-term planning, those things become normalized. The conversation at dinner is different. The expectations people have of each other are different. The information that gets exchanged casually, the investment opportunities someone mentions, the business contacts someone introduces, the tax strategy someone's accountant just recommended, is categorically more valuable than the conversation happening around a different table where the primary topics are complaints about employers and debates about consumer purchases. Your information environment matters as much as your social one. The average person in 2026 consumes hours of media daily, social feeds, news cycles, entertainment, and very little of it is oriented toward building financial capability. In fact, a significant portion of it is actively working against your wealth building by selling you comparison, dissatisfaction, and the constant suggestion that consuming more things will resolve the feeling that something is missing. Every advertisement you see is an attempt to redirect your cash flow towards someone else's revenue. Every social media post of a lifestyle you admire is a potential psychological trigger for spending that moves you further from the financial security that would provide the genuine freedom you are actually looking for. Upgrading your environment does not mean abandoning your relationships or pretending to be something you are not. It means adding mentors whose financial outcomes you respect, adding communities, online or physical, oriented around building rather than consuming, adding information inputs that expand your vocabulary, your frameworks, and your understanding of how wealth is created, adding conversations with people who are operating at a level you aspire to. The environment tax is paid in lost opportunity, slower growth, and decisions made from a baseline of scarcity and low expectation. The dividend of an upgraded environment is compounding ambition, better information, higher standards, and the kind of peer influence that pulls you forward rather than anchors you in place. Chapter 10. The 2026 Opportunity Window, AI, Digital Leverage, and why this era is the greatest wealth-building moment in history. Every generation has a window, a specific alignment of technology, economic conditions, and social change that creates the possibility for ordinary people to build extraordinary wealth faster than the established order would typically allow. The 1990s had the internet. The 2000s had e-commerce. The 2010s had mobile, social media, and the app economy. In each of those eras, the people who recognized the window early and moved through it decisively created outcomes that looked miraculous to everyone watching from the outside, and obvious in retrospect to everyone who participated. We are living inside the next window right now, and most people are standing at the glass looking in rather than walking through. Artificial intelligence is not a future technology, it is a present one. Deployed at scale across nearly every industry, reshaping the economics of knowledge work, creative production, software development, customer service, data analysis, and hundreds of other domains simultaneously. For every job category it displaces, it creates new categories of leverage for people who understand how to use it. A single individual with access to AI tools can now produce research, content, code, design, marketing materials, and analytical work at a volume and quality that previously required teams. The ratio of output to input has changed fundamentally and permanently, and the people who internalize that change and position themselves accordingly will have access to income and wealth-building opportunities that simply did not exist 3 years ago. Digital leverage is the operative concept of this era. Leverage, in the financial sense, means amplifying your output relative to your input, using a tool, a structure, or a system to create more value than you could produce with your direct labor alone. Digital tools provide leverage at a scale and cost that is historically unprecedented. A course you create once can sell indefinitely. A piece of content can reach millions of people for the cost of the time it took to produce. Software you build can serve thousands of customers simultaneously without requiring proportionally more of your time. A brand built online can generate inbound business opportunities, partnership offers, and revenue streams that compound over years with diminishing marginal effort. These are not theoretical possibilities. They are the actual mechanics behind thousands of businesses generating significant income right now, many of them built by people with no specialized background, no significant startup capital, and no access to traditional business infrastructure. The democratization of financial markets represents a parallel opportunity. Access to investment vehicles that previously required institutional relationships or significant minimum balances is now available through platforms accessible on the smartphone. Index funds, fractional shares, real estate investment trusts, private credit instruments, and an expanding range of alternative assets are available to ordinary investors with amounts of capital that would have been turned away at the door a generation ago. The barrier to beginning an investment practice has never been lower in history. What was once the domain of the wealthy and the connected is now available to anyone with a phone, an internet connection, and the willingness to learn. None of this means the opportunity is guaranteed or that simply existing in 2026 makes you wealthy. The window is open, but it requires action, education, and the ability to filter the signal from the enormous noise. The noise includes every dubious crypto scheme, every overpriced online course promising passive income with zero effort, every social media guru selling the appearance of wealth rather than the mechanics of it. The signal includes the genuine leverage available through AI tools, the genuine opportunity in digital distribution, the genuine accessibility of investment markets, and the genuine transferability of skills in a global economy where your customer, your employer, and your business partner can be anywhere on Earth. Seeing the difference between the noise and the signal and moving decisively toward the signal is the work of this era. The window is open. The question is whether you walk through it. Chapter 11. Multiple streams or one sinking ship. Why one income in 2026 is a financial emergency. There is a statistic that has been cited so many times it has lost some of its impact, but the underlying reality it describes has become more true with every passing year. The majority of millionaires have multiple streams of income, not because having multiple streams automatically makes you wealthy, but because building wealth requires a level of financial resilience and surplus generating capacity that a single income source almost never provides. And because the process of building additional income streams inevitably teaches you skills, creates opportunities, and generates assets that compound in ways that employment income alone cannot. The vulnerability of a single income source is not theoretical. It plays out in real time every time an industry contracts, every time a company restructures, every time technology makes a category of work less valuable or less necessary. In 2026, those shifts are happening not over decades but over quarters. The professional who built a decade of expertise in a specific technical domain can now find that AI tools perform the core of that work at a fraction of the cost. The creative professional who built a career on skills that are now replicable through generative AI is renegotiating their value in real time. None of these people did anything wrong. They followed the conventional path with discipline and skill, but they bet their financial security on the continued relevance of one specific value proposition in a market that is changing at a pace no single bet can reliably track. The psychological barrier to building additional income streams is almost always time rather than capability. The person working full-time looks at their schedule and genuinely cannot see where a second income stream fits. And they are often right. In the short term, it does not fit easily. It requires carving time from somewhere, from leisure, from sleep, from social obligations, and investing that time not in activities that produce immediate income, but in activities that build toward income over time. A YouTube channel, a freelance skill, a rental property, an investment portfolio. None of these produce significant returns immediately. They produce them after months or years of consistent compounding effort. The person who is not willing to invest that time is making a choice, and the consequence of that choice is the one income vulnerability they were trying to avoid. The practical framework for building multiple streams does not require doing everything simultaneously. It requires doing one additional thing consistently until it produces meaningful results, and then building the next. The first additional stream might be a skill monetized through freelancing, writing, design, development, consulting, coaching, leveraged from expertise you have already built in your primary career. The second might be an investment portfolio built from the surplus that first additional stream creates. The third might be a digital product or content channel that builds an audience and generates passive revenue over time. Each stream requires a different investment of time and capital at different stages. The key is sequencing, starting with the stream that has the lowest barrier to initial revenue and using its output to fund the next layer. Financial resilience means that the loss of any single income source does not threaten your basic stability. That resilience is not built in a crisis. It is built in the calm before the crisis, through the deliberate construction of income diversity that most people postpone until the urgency of circumstance forces their hand. By that point, the options are more limited, the timeline is shorter, and the decisions are made under duress rather than strategy. Build before you need to. Build when you have the luxury of patience. Build the second ship before the first one starts showing cracks. Chapter 12. The Patience Paradox. Why the wealthy play a long game in a world obsessed with fast results. Speed is the dominant value of the modern economy. Same-day delivery, instant transfers, 60-second video content, real-time everything. The entire architecture of digital life has been optimized to deliver gratification at the smallest possible interval, and the effect on the collective financial psychology has been profound and largely destructive. Because the most powerful wealth-building mechanisms that exist, compounding, brand building, skill development, relationship capital, business growth, are fundamentally slow processes that cannot be meaningfully accelerated beyond certain natural rates. The person chasing speed in domains that reward patience is not being ambitious. They are being wasteful. The patience paradox is this. The people most in need of wealth are the ones with the least patience to build it, while the people who already have wealth are the ones most capable of waiting. This is not a opponent or to mean. It is a structural one. When you are financially stressed, every investment decision has an implicit urgency attached to it, because the money you are deploying represents a meaningful portion of your total resources. The potential loss is not abstract. It threatens your rent, your food, your ability to manage your basic obligations. That urgency destroys rational decision-making. It makes people exit investments too early, chase higher short-term returns at the cost of higher risk, and abandon long-term strategies the moment they underperform for a single quarter. Wealthy investors, by contrast, can hold positions through downturns, maintain strategies through periods of underperformance, and resist the temptation of seemingly faster alternatives because their basic financial security is not dependent on any single outcome. Building patience as a financial practice means building the security that makes patience possible. It means creating an emergency fund large enough that no single financial event can force a bad decision. It means setting investment strategies based on decade-long horizons and then committing to them through the inevitable volatility of shorter-term market movements. It means evaluating business decisions on their 3 to 5 year trajectory rather than their immediate-term performance. It means understanding that the best investments in your life, in your skills, your health, your relationships, your reputation, pay dividends so slowly that the connection between the investment and the return is almost invisible in any short window and profoundly obvious over any long one. The most expensive manifestation of impatience in financial life is the get-rich-quick mentality that fuels every speculative bubble, every multi-level marketing scheme, every too-good-to-be-true investment opportunity. These products exist because the demand for fast wealth is enormous and reliable. They extract billions of dollars from people who cannot afford to lose them by selling the promise of the destination without the reality of the journey. Every person who has lost money to a scam, a pump and dump, or a speculative mania was ultimately paying an impatience tax, a premium charged for wanting to skip the boring, slow, reliable path and arrive at the outcome without the process. The wealthy pay that tax least often, not because they are immune to greed, but because they have seen enough outcomes to understand that the process is the point. The discipline of the journey is what builds the capability, the judgment, and the resilience that makes the destination sustainable when you eventually arrive. Chapter 13. Inflation, Taxes, and the Invisible Thieves. Stealing your wealth right now. While you are working hard, saving diligently, and doing what you believe to be the responsible financial things, two forces are working against your wealth every single day without announcing themselves, without asking your permission, and without caring whether you understand what they are doing. Inflation and taxation are the invisible thieves of the financial world, and they are responsible for the slow-motion erosion of more accumulated wealth than any single market crash, any fraud, or any bad investment decision in history. Understanding them is not optional for anyone who is serious about building something that lasts. Inflation is the reduction in the purchasing power of money over time. In practical terms, it means that the same dollar buys less goods and services in the future than it does today. A modest inflation rate of 3% annually, which sounds harmless in isolation, reduces the purchasing power of a dollar by more than half over 25 years. This means that $1 million saved today will have the real-world purchasing power of roughly $450,000 a quarter century from now if it simply sits in an account, generating returns below the inflation rate. The math is not complicated. The implication is devastating for anyone who is storing their wealth rather than deploying it into assets that grow at or above the rate of inflation. The 2020s have provided a visceral education in inflationary dynamics for anyone paying attention. The combination of supply chain disruptions, unprecedented monetary expansion, energy price volatility, and structural shifts in labor markets produced inflationary pressures across major economies that were more sustained than central banks initially projected and more damaging to household purchasing power than at any point in recent memory. The people who were hurt most were not the wealthy. They were the cash holders, the bond-heavy conservative savers, the retirees on fixed incomes, and the working people whose wage growth lagged behind price increases for years. The people who were insulated and in many cases benefited were those holding real assets, property, equities, commodities, whose values tracked or exceeded inflationary pressures. Taxation is the second invisible thief, and while inflation is partly outside your control, your tax burden is more manageable than most people realize. If you understand the rules. The tax code in virtually every major economy is built around two fundamentally different sets of rules. One for people who earn income through employment, and one for people who earn income through business ownership, investment, and capital. Employment income is taxed at the highest marginal rates with the fewest available deductions. Business and investment income is taxed at lower rates. Capital gains rates, qualified dividend rates, depreciation deductions, business expense deductions. That can dramatically reduce the effective tax burden on the same dollar of economic value received in a different structural form. Wealthy people spend significantly on tax planning because the return on that investment is enormous. Moving income from a high-rate structure to a low-rate structure, timing the realization of capital gains strategically, using legitimate deductions available to business owners, structuring estates to minimize transfer taxes. These are not loopholes exploited by the corrupt, They are the intended use of a tax code that was written with these structures explicitly in mind. The average salaried employee has almost none of these options available to them and pays the full marginal rate on every dollar earned. The business owner, the investor, the real estate professional, they operate under a different set of rules, and knowing that a different set of rules exists is the first step toward eventually playing by them. Chapter 14. Building a legacy. From personal wealth to generational power. There comes a point in the financial journey where the question shifts. It stops being, how do I get enough for myself, and becomes, how do I build something that outlasts me? That shift is not automatic. It requires a level of abundance, or at least a clear vision of abundance, that most people never reach because they spend their entire lives in survival mode, managing scarcity, plugging financial holes, and never accumulating enough runway to think beyond their own immediate timeline. But the shift, when it happens, is transformative, because building for a legacy requires a completely different kind of discipline, a longer planning horizon, and a set of decisions that optimize not for your comfort but for the compounding of something much larger than yourself. Generational wealth is not just about money. It is about the transmission of financial intelligence, habits, values, and opportunity across time. The wealthiest families in the world have maintained their position not primarily through the direct inheritance of assets, though that matters, but through the inheritance of a way of thinking about money, risk, and opportunity that gets passed from generation to generation through conversation, modeling, and education. Children who grow up watching their parents invest, discuss tax strategy, evaluate business opportunities, and treat financial decisions as intellectual exercises rather than sources of anxiety, develop an entirely different relationship with money than children who grow up in households where money is a source of shame, secrecy, and stress. The most powerful legacy you can build for your children is not a trust fund. It is a financial education so deep and so normalized that wealthy behavior becomes their default. The structural tools for legacy building include estate planning, wills, trusts, beneficiary designations that ensure your accumulated assets transfer to the intended people with the minimum loss to taxation and legal process. They include life insurance used not as an expense but as a wealth transfer mechanism, creating guaranteed capital for the next generation regardless of the market conditions or timing of your death. They include business succession planning for those who build companies, determining whether to pass ownership to family members, sell to employees, or position for acquisition, and beginning that planning years before it becomes urgent. They include investment accounts structured with tax-advantaged growth in mind, real estate portfolios with clear succession plans, and the deliberate documentation of the financial knowledge and strategies that allowed you to build what you built. Legacy also means contribution beyond your immediate family. The wealthiest and most respected builders in history have almost universally left behind not just fortunes but institutions, universities, hospitals, foundations, public works that extended their impact beyond any one lifetime. This is not exclusively the domain of the ultra-wealthy. Every business you build that employs people, every investment that develops a property that serves a community, every financial decision you make that creates surplus you can redirect toward causes larger than yourself is an act of legacy building. The question of what kind of mark you leave on your family, your community, the people who come after you, is ultimately the question that gives all the financial strategy its deepest meaning. Chapter 15. The First Move. What to do in the next 30 days to begin your real financial life. Everything in this audiobook has been building to this chapter, not because this is where the most complex ideas live. It is not. But because complexity without action is just entertainment, and the gap between knowing what to do and actually doing it is where the vast majority of financial potential goes to die. It dies not in dramatic failure, but in quiet postponement. The decision that gets made tomorrow, then next week, then after the new year, then when things settle down, then someday, indefinitely. The antidote to someday is not motivation, it is specificity. A clear, concrete, time-bound first move that you can execute regardless of your current income, your current knowledge level, or your current circumstances. The first move is an audit. Before you invest a dollar, before you open an account, before you start a business, you need a clear and honest picture of where you actually stand. That means knowing your total monthly income from every source. It means knowing your total monthly expenses categorized by necessity and choice. It means knowing your total debt, the amount, the interest rate, and the minimum payment for every obligation you carry. It means knowing your total assets, not what you think you own, but what you actually own, that generates income or holds real value. Most people have never done this exercise in full because seeing the numbers clearly is uncomfortable. But discomfort in the audit is infinitely preferable to the continuing discomfort of financial decisions made in ignorance of your actual position. The second move, completed within the same 30 days, is eliminating one financial drain. One subscription you do not use. One spending habit that provides minimal satisfaction relative to its cost. One debt with a small balance that you can eliminate entirely this month and recapture as monthly cash flow. The psychological effect of eliminating a drain is disproportionate to its dollar value because it demonstrates to your own brain that you are capable of making different choices, that your financial situation is not simply happening to you, but is responsive to your decisions. That sense of agency is the foundation everything else is built on. The third move is planting one seed. Opening an investment account if you do not have one. Making your first contribution, however small, to a retirement or investment vehicle. Enrolling in one course, reading one book. Listening to one series of content that deepens your financial education in the specific area most relevant to your current stage. Reaching out to one person whose financial trajectory you respect and asking for 30 minutes of their time. Register in one domain. Writing one piece of content. Applying for one freelance project. The first physical act of building something beyond your primary income. The seed does not need to be large. It needs to be real. Something you actually do rather than plan to do. 30 days from now, you will be one of two people. The person who heard this audiobook and thought about it for a while before returning to their previous patterns, or the person who did the audit, eliminated one drain and planted one seed. Those two people do not look very different in 30 days. But in 3 years, the compounding effect of those 3 decisions made consistently, built upon iteratively, expanded as the foundation gets stronger, produces outcomes so different that the two people are barely recognizable as having started in the same place. The choice of which person to be is available to you right now, today, in this moment, not tomorrow, not after one more video. Now, your financial life does not start when circumstances change. It starts when you decide it does. You made it to the end. And that is not a small thing. In a world of 15-second attention spans and infinite content competing for every minute of your time, staying with something for this long, listening, thinking, confronting uncomfortable truths about money, belief systems, and the gap between where you are and where you want to be, that is an act of commitment to yourself. And that commitment is exactly the character trait that separates the people who eventually build real wealth from the people who accumulate knowledge without ever converting it into action. Let us take a moment to look at what actually happened in these 15 chapters. We started by identifying the comfortable trap, the seductive stability of a life that looks fine from the outside, while quietly foreclosing on every possibility of financial freedom. We exposed the education system not as an enemy, but as an incomplete tool, one that was never designed to teach you what you actually need to know about money, and that left a gap you are now responsible for filling. We dismantled the paycheck prison and the belief that a salary is a financial strategy rather than a starting point. We went deep into the psychology that governs every financial decision you will ever make, the difference between a brain wired for scarcity and one wired for abundance, and the evidence that the wiring is not fixed. We redefined money from the comfortable abstraction most people treat it as into the dynamic, depreciating, system-embedded tool it actually is, and showed you why understanding its true nature is one of the most important cognitive upgrades available. We reframed debt from shame to strategy and showed you exactly how the wealthy use borrowed capital to build empires while the uninformed use it to fund consumption. We made the asset-liability distinction so clear that you will never look at a purchase the same way again. We talked about compounding with the urgency it deserves, not as a nice-to-have investment concept, but as the fundamental architecture of every significant wealth outcome, demanding that you start now, regardless of how late you feel. We exposed the environment tax and made the case for intentional, strategic upgrading of your circle, your inputs, and your daily information environment as a direct wealth-building act. We walked through the 2026 opportunity window and showed you that the chaos and disruption of this era are not threats to your financial future. They are the opportunity, if you have the eyes to see it and the courage to act. We built the case for multiple income streams as a non-negotiable resilience requirement, not an ambitious bonus for high achievers. We explored the patience paradox and the profound cost of impatience in a world that sells speed at every turn. We named the invisible thieves, inflation and taxes, and gave you the framework for understanding how they operate and how to begin protecting yourself. We talked about legacy and what it means to build something that matters beyond your own timeline. And we ended with the most important chapter of all, the one that demands not contemplation, but action. The game is not perfectly fair. It never has been. The information, the access, the structural advantages, they are not equally distributed, and pretending otherwise would be dishonest. But the gap between what is available to an ordinary person in 2026 who is willing to learn and act and what was available to that same person a generation ago is enormous and overwhelmingly in your favor. The tools are accessible. The information is accessible. The markets, the platforms, the communities, the mentors, more accessible than at any point in history. What was once locked behind country club memberships and institutional relationships is now available to anyone with internet access and the will to use it. If this audiobook moved you, challenged you, or gave you one idea that changes how you make a single financial decision, share it. Leave a comment below with the chapter that hit hardest. Tell us the one shift that landed for you. Hit the like button and subscribe to Prime Audiobooks so you never miss what we release next. We are building something here, a community of people who take their financial education seriously, who are done being passive about money, who are ready to think and act like the people they want to become. Help us grow that community. Help us hit our next milestone. Every subscriber is a real person choosing a different relationship with money, and that means everything. The game is rigged, but now you know the rules. Go build,